the crowns that we receive from God. As a matter of fact, it was up until last night that was still my intention. But it seems that the Lord had other plans at this point. He wants me to talk to you about fasting. Before I get into my message this evening, I do want to take just a few minutes to take you on the journey that I've been through this week, because it leads up to this particular fasting thing. I know that I've mentioned to you and I've mentioned to the board that I've been seeking the Lord to get us back to a Sunday morning service, and I was hoping that I would find a place. So I've been spending time with God, keeping my ears open, asking around, trying to figure things out, and well, I haven't found anything at this point. And since I haven't heard from you guys, I'm assuming you haven't either. So we are here until he says something else. So as I said, so far there's nothing regarding our change of location, but he has a lot to say about where he wants to take us individually. A week ago, the Lord spoke to me and told me that I was to be patient. He said that things would begin to change this week. He said specifically Tuesday that they would begin to change. It just wasn't regarding our location. No, I'm asking, believe me. Anyway, the word that I shared last week about telling your heart to beat again has just made an impression on my life. It has made such an impression on my life. As a matter of fact, I just got the book in the mail today. It wasn't what I thought it was, because I had no idea what the book was about, but I'll get into that in a little bit. So I'm hoping that it made an impression on your hearts too. Did it? Have you been thinking about it? Okay, good. He wants us, I really believe this, I really believe he wants us to ask him what we have buried, what has died in our lives, what dreams, what trust, even in regard to him and to the plans that he has for you or me or us collectively. Let me read something before I go on. I did get this book today. And it's a book by Dutch Sheets, and it says to tell your heart to beat again. And what's very interesting is I only read the first chapter, and I read it probably about an hour and a half ago. He's talking about how hope deferred makes a heart grow sick, and I guess that's primarily what this whole book is about. But he gets to a place in the first chapter, and he talks about Abraham and Sarah. Remember the Lord came to Abraham and told him that he was going to have a child. And it took 24 years before the Lord came back and told him, now, at this time next year, you'll have a child. But at this point, it's very interesting. It says here, after the angel came back to him and said, then Abraham fell on his face and laughed. And he said in his heart, will a child be born to a man 100 years old? And will Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child? And Abraham said to God, oh, that Ishmael might live forever. It was like he didn't even want any more kids. Just let's do the Ishmael thing. And God said, no. The blessing wasn't going to come through Ishmael. So the angel goes on to tell him that at that time next year that Sarah would have a child. But what was really interesting, during those 24 years, what had happened to Abraham and Sarah was they became disillusioned. Has God spoken to you and you've been disillusioned? Well, it's interesting because Dutch brings up 6 little points here, and I thought they were worth mentioning. He talks about how hope deferred, how it can really change a life. And these are good ways to see if it's happened to you. The first is discouragement. It's the early stage of the disease called a heart with no hope. The second is confusion, where when we begin to question ourselves, our dreams, and God's promises. Anybody been there? The third is unbelief, wherein hope is lost and expectation is gone. The fourth is disillusionment. The first stage of bitterness, which usually involves questioning even the character of God. If we were to tell the truth, Haven't we been there? Number 5 is bitterness. We're in with deep feelings of resentment. We blame God, others, and maybe even ourselves. The reason that the dreams and the visions and all the things that we have haven't come to pass. And the last is cynicism, a complete loss of faith and hope, and a dead heart. Now, I have met many people throughout my life, since I've been saved, who have walked with God, but have been so discouraged that their heart has died. They have a dead heart. Well, I do believe that God wants to awaken whatever God has imparted to you. And it's not just what's current. You guys have been walking with the Lord for a season. And there are things throughout your lifetime that God has specifically spoken to you, and He's saying, go back. I want you to dig it up. It's really important. It's really important for where God is taking you as an individual. As I continue to read this book, even the story about Abraham and Sarah, you'll see that they hoped beyond hope. And because their hope was hope beyond hope, they got to see the reality of that hope coming to pass. And I believe that's true for us as well. So I'm reading this book. God is saying we got to learn about fasting. But, I'm thinking crowns, God. Let's talk about crowns. But God has a way of working, and He's very mysterious. He has a way of taking us from where we are and taking us to a place where He says, I'm talking, come pay attention to me. So I get an email on Tuesday from a woman sitting in this room, and it's Ezekiel 37. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that particular passage. It was actually Jenny that sent it to me. And I want to read it to you in the Good News translation. Let me read to you what it says. This is the valley of dry bones. I felt the powerful presence of the Lord, and His spirits took me and set me down in a valley where the ground was covered with bones. He led me all around the valley, and I could see that there were very many bones, and that they were very dry. He said to me, mortal man, can these bones come back to life? And I replied, well, Sovereign Lord, only you can answer that. He said, prophesy to the bones. Tell these dry bones to listen to the word of the Lord. Tell them that I, the Sovereign Lord, am saying to them, I am going to put breath into you and bring you back to life. I will give you sinews and muscles and cover you with skin. I will put a breath into you and bring you back to life. Then you will know that I am the Lord. So I prophesied as I had been told. While I was speaking, I heard a rattling noise, and the bones began to join together. While I watched, the bones were covered with sinews and muscles and with their skin. But there was no breath in the bodies. God said to me, mortal man, prophesy to the wind. Tell the wind that the Sovereign Lord commands it to come from every direction to breathe into these dead bodies and to bring them back to life. So I prophesied as I had been told. Breathe into the bodies, and they came back to life and stood up. And there were enough of them to form an army. God said to me, mortal man, the people of Israel are like these bones. They say that they are dried up without any hope and with no future. So prophesy to my people, Israel, and tell them that I, the Sovereign Lord, am going to open their graves. I'm going to take them out, I can't believe I'm crying here, and bring them to the land of Israel. When I open the graves where my people are buried and bring them out, they will know that I am the Lord. I will put my breath in them, bring them back to life, and let them live in their own land. I don't know why I'm crying. Then they will know that I am the Lord. I have promised that I will do this, and I will. The Lord, I have spoken. Well, I don't know why I'm crying. I just have to deviate from this for a minute. God is speaking to you. He's speaking to me. But you have to speak to the bones. You have to tell your heart to beat again. Because if you don't, it won't. We were worshiping, the presence of the Lord was so strong on me, and my heart was aching. Because there's so much about our God that we don't know, that I don't know. There's so much about him that I've yet to discover and to trust. I want that desperately. And I believe that's what you want as well. When the Lord told me that Tuesday things would begin to change, he told me that I was to take a tithe. And he gave me the place that I was to take the money. And he told me exactly how much to tithe, and I did. That afternoon, I had a meeting with Corporal Alan Wilkett. I don't know how many of you guys know him. He works with Chris Nacco. He is a mighty man of God. Let me tell you something. He's an awesome man of God. Anyway, we're sitting down, we're talking, we're sharing some things, and we're pretty good friends. And he asked me if I would consider becoming a chaplain to the police. And it's a volunteer position. There are 16 other people. And they just happened to have their kickoff meeting that night. And I went. I have some apprehension, of course, because I don't know how I will feel about seeing a body. Death doesn't frighten me, it's just seeing it in parts. I don't know how, but I figure if this is what the Lord wants, he'll prepare me and I'll have courage when I need it. Anyway, as the day continued, there seemed to be a word that God was speaking. It seemed every time I turned around, the same word kept coming forth. And it was fasting and praying. It's not unusual that this time of year most churches go into a fast because or pastors or leaders in a church, because they're looking for direction. And if you want the clear, pure direction of the Lord, you need to take yourself and set yourself aside so that you can truly hear what the Lord is saying. Well, at that meeting that night, there was another guy who was a friend. He is a pastor also, and his name is Leonard Lord. And he started to talk to me about fasting again. He was talking about a fast that they'll be doing. It will be a national fast, which I'm thinking that we probably will participate if you want to. It will start 40 days before Pentecost. And there'll be very specific things that we'll be praying every week, but we'll get to that at another time. So anyway, so he's talking to me about fasting. So Wednesdays, I was preparing to start teaching on Romans. The Lord got my attention again. But before I go there, I just want a little sidebar here. We are going to be studying Romans, and it's going to be a very in-depth study. I made all these notes, and I meant to bring them for you guys, and I forgot. We're going to take it apart. There'll be challenges in the Word, but we're going to talk about all the things that God is saying in the book of Romans. Romans, I don't know how familiar you are with Romans. It's very meaty. It's a very meaty book. And it's going to help settle some things in your life, your maybe questions regarding your walk, God, all these things. It's a lot of meat in this book. So if you can, please come and join us. Okay, so back to Wednesday. So the Lord had my attention again, as I was saying. Jensen Franklin, I don't know how many of you guys listen to him, but I don't get to listen to him all the time, and I don't know. Anyway, he happened to be on. And he was teaching about the importance of fasting and praying and seeking God for direction and blessing for this particular year. Well, after that went off, somehow Sid Roth's Supernatural came on. And I don't usually just sit there because I was studying. But anyway, Supernatural came on, and whoever the speaker was, and I couldn't find the show. All these other shows, even the show that was on later that night, but not that particular show. Anyway, whoever this guy was that was talked about fasting also. It seemed really interesting to me because one of the things that he talked about, he has a very large church, was that he and his church fasted 40 days from all electronic devices. No TV, things like that, things that would be just distraction. I'm not saying you shouldn't do your job, you need a phone, you need those kind of, I'm not talking about that. But I'm talking about literally setting aside everything else for God. So obviously this caught my attention as well. Well, Thursday morning comes around, and I'm preparing again for tonight, and Jensen Franklin was on again. And he was talking about fasting again. You know, frankly, I don't even know if the message he gave Thursday morning was the same he gave Wednesday. But it didn't matter, because God was trying to get my attention. That was the whole point of this. So I said, okay, God, I'm listening. So tonight what we're going to do is that, God bless you, we're going to look at fasting. True fasting as described in Isaiah 58, which is what I gave each one of you. I'm not going to get into the type of fast tonight. Rather, I want to get into the attitude of fasting. And that's what we're going to see in Isaiah 58 tonight. The conditions that God has set in place. You know, everything that God does, if you read the Word, He says, if you do this, this will happen. I mean, even grace. You don't have grace unless you accept it. So before I get started, so let me start with giving you a definition of fasting, of what I think the definition is. I think this will be helpful. Let's say, fasting is a spiritual discipline of refraining from food, typically, for a period of time to focus on God. So it's a spiritual discipline of refraining from food, typically, or maybe, you know, as I mentioned before, the other guys who fasted from using electronic devices, for a period of time to focus on God. It is something that God expects us to do. In fact, if you look through the Bible, you will discover that it was assumed that followers of Christ would fast. If you look at Mark 2:20, people had questioned Jesus because John the Baptist and his disciples and the Pharisees were fasting, but Jesus wasn't. And the reason they questioned him is because typically Pharisees fasted on Mondays and Thursdays. And since John the Baptist kind of followed what they did, they were questioning Jesus as to why he wasn't doing the same thing. And this was his response. He said, how can the guests of the bridegroom fast while he is still with them? This is Mark 2. Jesus says, but the day will come when the bridegroom will be taken away from them, and they will fast. Now, you know Jesus is referring to himself as the bridegroom. Now, listen to what he says next. This is, look in Matthew 6, this is 16 through 18. He says, and when you fast. He says, and when you fast, do not put on it, this is also the New Living, do not put on a sad face as the hypocrites do. They neglect their appearance so that everyone will see that they are fasting. I assure you that they have already been paid in full. When you go without food, wash your face, comb your hair so that others cannot know that you are fasting. Only your Father who is unseen will know, and your Father who sees what you do in private will reward you. Now, the operative word here is when, not if. So we are expected to fast, to set aside a time to spend with God. And not just once, but I would suggest that you do it many times throughout your life, throughout your year. Especially when you're making decisions, you're looking for direction, you know, or you even need help with something, or you just want to draw closer to Him. You need to fast, you need to set that time aside, get the distractions out of your life. Jensen Franklin says in his message what he does. He says about fasting and prayer. What he did is that he took us to the book of Matthew. And I want you to go to Matthew, and we're going to go to chapter 17. So I'm just going to make a couple of points here so I can get into my message. He talks about fasting and praying, and he had them look at Matthew 17. And these are verses 14 through 21. Now, just let me give you some information here. Verse 21 in Matthew is not present in all translations. And the reason, it's like it's not in the NIV. And the reason it's not is because some believe that that was added as a result of, I think it's Mark 9:29. So, but it is, when you look and you look at it in Strong's, you'll see that particular passage is there. Anyway, so let me get to my place here. Okay, this is a story about a boy who wasn't whose disciples who had a demon, and the father of this little boy had asked the disciples to come and heal him, and they weren't able to do it. So he came to Jesus and he asked him to take and heal his son. And verse 17 says, "O unbelieving and perverse generation." He's telling his disciples, he's telling the people around them that they don't believe and they're perverse. They're preoccupied. They're thinking of things other than God. And if you continue to read it, it says that Jesus rebuked the demon and it came out of the boy and he was healed from that moment. His disciples at that point came to him and asked him, well, why couldn't we drive it out? And he replied, he says, because you have so little faith. I tell you the truth, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you. Verse 21, which is not present in the NIV, says, some things only come out by prayer and fasting. So it's important to understand that there are some things in your life that will only change by you literally setting aside time in prayer and in fasting. I love what Jensen says. He says this: prayer connects you to God, fasting disconnects you from the world.
Amen. Can you repeat that?
Yes. Prayer connects you to God. Fasting disconnects you from the world. I wish I came up with that. I really believe that the Lord is telling us time to focus. I know that several of you are out looking for different things in your life, your ministry, jobs, whatever it might be. You know, I know Carl and Darlene are on a new adventure. I mean, we're all looking for something. We're looking for God to speak to us. And I really believe that He wants our attention right now. He has something to say to you. He has something very important to say to us. But He wants your undivided attention. He wants us to remove the distractions from our lives so that we can hear Him. Okay, now that we know that fasting is not a suggestion, that it is a command, it's expected of us, pull out Isaiah 58. Now, before I get to let me say this to you, what I want you to do tonight is I want you to consider three things. I want you to consider the dry bones in your life. Your dreams, your talents, your gifts, the personal promises that God has spoken to you. Maybe you buried some, maybe some were stolen, maybe even the Lord removed some. I don't know. But I want you to consider those things. And I want you to recognize that some things can change only when we fast and we pray. And the third is I want you to consider your fast. The ones you've done in the past and the one that the Lord is leading you into based on Isaiah 58. Okay? Now what I'm going to do is, as I read this to you, I really battled whether I'd use the NIV or a different translation, and I opted to use a different translation. Because if you look in the NIV, because that's the translation I use, you'll see words like if and then, which lets you know that there are contingencies and that you need to consider those things if you want to see the hand of God move in your life. But I chose this translation anyway. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make some comments as I read it to you, and the reason I printed it out for you is because I wanted you to write them down. Shout with the voice of a trumpet blast. Tell my people of their sins, yet they act so pious. They come to the temple every day and so delighted to hear the reading of my laws, just as though they would obey them, just as though they don't despise the commandments of their God. How anxious they are to worship correctly. Oh, how they love the temple services. He's really mocking them, by the way. You know, it's like the person that comes to church and they love all the things that are being said, but they don't really apply it to their lives. It's a mockery. They say, we have fasted. So the first one is, in that first section that I gave you, we look at deception. We have to be really careful about our attitude. Understand that God, and I say this all the time, God is always dealing with our heart. Always dealing with our heart. Because his desire is that we become one with him. So, when you go to fasting, consider repenting. Verse 3 says, we have fasted before you, they say. Why aren't you impressed? Why don't you see our sacrifices? Why don't you hear our prayers? We have done much penance and you don't even notice. You don't even notice it. A little arrogant, wouldn't you say? He goes on to say, I'll tell you why. Because you are living in evil pleasure, even while you are fasting, and you keep right on oppressing your workers. Look, what good is fasting when you keep on fighting and quarreling? This kind of fasting will never get you anywhere with me. Is that what I want? This doing of penance and bowing like reeds in the wind, putting on sackcloth and covering yourselves with ashes? Is that what you call fasting? So where's your heart? Where's your heart as you come before the Lord and you're fasting? It's like the Lord is saying, seriously? Seriously? In the NIV it says, in verse 4, it says, you cannot fast as you do today and expect your voice to be heard on high. 6. No, the kind of fast I want is that you stop oppressing those who work for you and treat them fairly and give them what they earn. I want you to share your food with the hungry and bring right into your own homes those who are helpless, poor, and destitute. Clothe those who are cold, and don't hide from your relatives who need your help. Don't hide from your relatives. You know why? Because those are the ones we hide from the most. I mean, God is, he's saying to us, listen, your fast and my fast do not look the same. Let's look at the evidence. Let's look at the evidence. If you go through the scriptures, you'll see that God, Jesus actually, it's Paul who talks about being immature. There's all this quarreling and all these things that are going on, the backbiting. It's a sign of immaturity. Well, if we want to grow in the things of God, we've got to learn to start putting those things aside and doing what he says rather than what we feel like doing. Verse 8 says, then, in the NIV, the word is then. This is the contingency plan. If you do these things, God will shed his own glorious light upon you. He will heal you. Your godliness will lead you forward. Goodness will be the shield before you, and the glory of the Lord will protect you from behind. Then, when you call, the Lord will answer. Yes, I am here. He will quickly reply. All you need to do is stop oppressing the weak and stop making false accusation and spreading vicious rumors. Wow. That's quite an interpretation of those passages, isn't it? Feed the hungry, help those in trouble. Then your light will shine out from the darkness, and the darkness around you should be as bright as the day. And the Lord will guide you continually and satisfy you with all good things and keep you healthy too. And you will be like a well-watered garden, that's like refreshed, like an ever-flowing spring. Then your sons will rebuild the long-deserted ruins of your cities, and you will be known as the people who rebuild their walls in their cities. Are we not supposed to be the people that step out and help those? My desire is Isaiah 61. This is from Isaiah 61, by the way. If you keep the Sabbath holy, not only having your own fun and business on that day, but enjoying the Sabbath, speaking of it with delight as the Lord's holy day, and honoring the Lord in what you do, not following your own desires and pleasures, nor talking idly. You know that, Scripture tells you where there are many words, there's sin. Then the Lord will be your delight, and I will see to it that you ride high and get your full share of the blessings I promised to Jacob your father, for the Lord has spoken. So he's telling us if we do this, we will get the promises. You know, it says in Mark 2:27 and 28 regarding the Sabbath, it says that the Sabbath, Jesus said that the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. And he actually says that he's the Lord of the Sabbath. And what that means, the Sabbath is for your well-being. You need to rest. It's a time to be contemplative. It's a time to withdraw and just, you know, you need to rejuvenate. You need some time to start again. You need a battery charge. The Sabbath really has some purposes. You know, 7 years they were told to let the land lie and to raise crops in a different area so that the land could redevelop. It could, I guess, it would get its nutrients again. Well, we need that too. So the Lord is telling us that when we fast, it's really important that we're doing it with the right attitude. Again, remember, God is always dealing with our heart. You can spin on your head, spit nickels, you can do every kind thing or everything that looks kind. But if you're not doing it with the right heart, He's not impressed. You know, the title of my message tonight was A True Fast, because I think it's really important that when we do the things that God calls us to do, that we do them in the way in which He wants us to do them. Not in the way that we think we should do them, but in the way He wants us to. You know, God has a plan and a purpose for your life. And His desire is that we accomplish whatever that is. He has not left us on our own to figure this out. He has always got people around us, His Word, His Spirit. He's always there to help us move forward. It's what we decide to do. What I want you to see now, what I don't want you to feel is condemnation because of this. None of us have arrived. But I do want you to know that God will convict you. And in conviction, there's also inspiration. Because what happens, you remove the things that stand in the way, and the things that God has for you to do draw you forward. I want us to look at the benefits again from doing the right thing. He says, there's healing. That's verse 8. He goes on to say that you'll change. You'll look like Him. You'll radiate. That's verse 10. The Lord will go before you and guide you and direct you. That's verse 11. Verse 11 and 12 tell us that we'll have refreshing. And in that refreshing, we'll be able to do the work that He has called us to do. It's not, you know, because you get tired in well-doing. We need the refreshing. And He says if you rest, if you keep the Sabbath, and you keep focused on Him, you stay connected to Him, in the NIV it says, you will find the joy of the Lord. Aren't we all looking for the joy of the Lord? Isn't that our strength? Isn't that what the Word says? And then it goes on, it finishes by saying, and that there is a blessing. We receive the inheritance, the promise that is made to us. Now, isn't that what you desire? Really? I want to commit to the fullness. Don't you want to commit to the fullness is what He has for you? The immeasurably more than we can possibly imagine or even dream of? Knowing the height, the width, the length, and the breadth of His love for us, isn't that what you want? Don't you want to serve Him with all of your soul? With everything in you, don't you want to serve Him? The no holds bar, nothing gets in the way, isn't that ultimately what you want? Well, that's what he wants. No, I started by telling you that I wanted you to consider these three things. The dry bones in your life, the dreams, the talents, the promises, the gifts, your personal promises spoken to you by God. Recognizing that some things require that you change, but it can only be changed by prayer and fasting. And to consider your fast as you go forward. The last, and God is calling you into a fast, so you will have to consider these things. Now, what's really important in all of this is you have to understand that you have to allow God to direct you. He is the reason for the fast, and He is the reason that we're going into the fast, because He's calling you into it. What I want you to do, a couple of things here. Three things, as a matter of fact. So somewhere you have records of your dreams, your promises, the gifts that you know have worked in your life. Now, I know for me, often they're in my Bible. I don't always write them aside. I usually keep a note next to what I've written in my Bible. I want you to find them. You need to go and find them. Ask God to show you where they are. We are going to speak to those dead bones. We're going to tell your heart to beat again. But let's find out what you've taken out. Now, while you're fasting and praying, and you're seeking God for direction, you have to learn to move into the authority that you have, that has been given you. That's the speaking to the dry bones. That's the telling your heart to beat again. That's telling Satan, no, God does not give gifts and take them away. He says his gifts are given without repentance. We may be plugged into the wrong source, but his desire is that we use everything that he's imparted to us. And you have to make sure your attitude is right. First, towards God. So if you got some issues with God, go take care of them. I've had them. Listen, I have not arrived. You got to go take care of them. And for those that are around you, if you have an attitude towards them, you've got to ask the Lord. Listen, some things only come by prayer and fasting. Even a change of heart sometimes only comes by prayer and fasting. If you have a problem, ask God for help. He is not surprised by our humanness, or our humanity, or however you say that phrase, or that word. But he is not surprised. He says he knows the beginning from the end. He knows everything in between. And guess what? He still chose you. He's still walking with you, and he's still beckoning. He's still calling. He's saying, come, come, come. I still have more. So don't let anything get in your way from moving into the fullness of what he's got for you. I want to finish with an example from my own personal life. I just want to show you how I went through this journey. And maybe for those of you who have never done it, it will be helpful. And if you do already do this, just bear with me. As I had mentioned to you before, Isaiah 61 was the foundation of, to me, the church. This is why God has called us together. He's called us to preach, and he's called us to walk through the healing. We were going to see lots of things happen, and I still believe that with all my heart. But Isaiah 61 comes after Isaiah 58. And in order for Isaiah 61 to happen, I have to do Isaiah 58 right. You know what? I never even considered it before. And the reason I say that specifically, because it says in Isaiah 58:12, let me just read this to you. It says, Your people will rebuild the ancient rooms and will raise up the age-old foundations. You will be called the repair of the broken walls and restore the streets with dwelling. Isaiah 61:4. Let me read this to you. It says, they will rebuild the ancient ruins and restore the places long devastated. They will renew the ruined cities that have been devastated for generations. Well, if I want to see that working in my life, and if I want to see God use me for that, then maybe, just maybe, not speaking about you, but maybe I need to get some things right. Maybe I need to go to the Lord. Maybe I need to do some praying and fasting and see. Now, I don't know that that's true or not, but I'm pretty human, so there's a good chance. So I want to see Isaiah 61. I want to see it, because that's why I believe the Lord died. That's why he was raised from the dead. So as I said, my desire is to see Isaiah 58:12. My people will rebuild the ancient ruins and will raise up the age-old foundations. You will be called the redeemer of the broken walls, restorer of streets with dwellings. And Isaiah 60:18 says this, walls will be called salvation, just so you know what the walls are. The walls will be called salvation, your gates praise. For the Lord will be your everlasting light, and your God will be your glory. Isaiah 60:20b. This is what the Lord will do. He'll take me from one place, and then he'll take me to the next so I can see. He'll begin to unfold or give some understanding or interpretation to something he speaks. The Lord will be your everlasting light, and your days of sorrow will end. They are the shoot I have planted, the work of my hands, or the display of my splendor. The least of you will become 1,000, the smallest a mighty man. I am the Lord. It is time now. I will do it swiftly. Ezekiel 36:10, because the Lord will take me from place to place. He says, I'm concerned for you. You will be plowed and sown. And 10 says, and I will multiply the number of your people upon you. The town will be inhabited and the ruins rebuilt. I will increase the number of men and animals upon you. And I wrote some more. And they will be fruitful and multiply and become numerous. I will settle people upon you as in the past and make you prosper more than before. Then you will know that I am the Lord. Does the Lord speak to you guys like this? Does he take you on a journey through his word and he speaks to you? He gives understanding to an initial word he may plant in your heart. It may be a single word. Crown. And I'll follow that through and I'll say, okay, well, what are you saying? In this particular case, it was fasting, and God had something very specific to say. Now, because of that word that Jenny sent me, and also because of the word that the Lord gave me last week, and because of the word that was spoken to me back in September, and the word was consistent, saying you need to find out what was said so that you can tell it to live again. And I'm like, Lord, I don't even remember what was said anymore. Been there? Anybody? Okay. So I just happened to stumble across this. It's Isaiah 62, and this was given to me November 19, 2011. Now, mind you, the complete opposite has happened. This is November 19, 2011. This is the promise calling back. It's called a new name. It says here, no longer will, referring to me because I put it in the present, what's the word? First person. No longer will I be called deserted or my land named desolate, but I will be called Heshzibah, and your land Beulah, for the Lord will take delight in me, and my land will be married. Now, let me just give you some interpretation here. Obviously, the word that I will no longer be called deserted, so I will have inhabitants. My land named, it will no longer be called desolate, which is waste or ruined or destitute. But I will be called Heshzibah, which means valuable. It's concrete. It's desired. It's favored. And your land Beulah. And what that is, it's owned. It's owned by a master. It's yours. It's God's substance. It's important. For the Lord will take delight in me, which means desire and favor. And in me, my land will be married. There'll be a join. There'll be a thing that will happen. So that's what he spoke to me in 2011, and that's not what happened. So what I did is I looked up a new name. I looked up what it meant to have a crown of splendor. I looked up royal diet. I looked at all these different words that came up and all these things that the Lord had spoken to me. And he begins to speak very clearly. He gives me understanding. Now, God has done the same for you. He's given you a word. He wants you to go find out what he's saying. And then he wants you to go and speak to that word. If it has died, tell it to live again. If you buried it, go dig it up, take it out of the casket, put it back in your heart, and tell your heart to beat. Please hear me. I really believe that God wants you to come into everything he's got for you. But you have to participate. Okay, I'm almost done. I took a personal inventory, and I think that's something we all need to do. So based on the 3 hours that I asked you to consider, let me just give you a little bit. I failed. I succeeded. I lost sight at times. I had to encourage myself. I had to ask other people to encourage me. Sometimes I cried. Sometimes I laughed. Sometimes I got angry. Sometimes, the whole gamut of emotions. I had to do some rearranging. I'm learning. You're learning. That's the process. That's your sanctification. That's coming into the fullness that God has for you. God will not leave you. He will take you if you are willing. The Word tells us that in our weakness, he is strong. And that he is faithful to complete that which he has begun in us. Because you have a destiny. As long as it is today, you and I need to seek him. Because if we seek him, we will find him. So the way that I am going to approach this is I am going to fast and I'm going to pray. I'm going to make sure that when I approach God this time, I'm going to do it with reverence, with the right heart, the right attitude, assuming nothing. God bless you. And where I struggle, I'm going to say, God, help me. And I'm going to ask God to remind me of all the promises, the gifts and the talents and the visions and everything that I may have laid aside. And I'm going to ask him to remind me of what they are. Show me where they are, Lord. Show me where I even wrote them. Show me when you spoke to me. So that I can speak to those things and that they will live. And my challenge for you is to do the same. Amen.